When you think about massive social change, what comes to mind? Protests? New laws? Well, sometimes it starts with something a lot simpler. Just a single, powerful idea. Today, we're going to dive into how a religious wildfire back in the 19th century lit the spark for some of America's biggest, most important reform movements. It's a fascinating story. Let's trace those flames.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture America in the early 1800s. The Industrial Revolution is just kicking into high gear. All that quiet farm life, that's disappearing fast. And it's being replaced by the noise, the smoke, and just the grime of these packed cities and nonstop factories. It was a time of unbelievable growth for sure, but also a ton of stress for the average person.
You can imagine how people felt, right? Kind of lost, like their whole world was just spinning out of control. So the big question is, what on earth could take all that chaos and anxiety and turn it into a nationwide push for positive change? What was the spark?
All right, so to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to understand where all that stress was coming from. America was a nation in constant motion, and frankly, a lot of people felt like they were getting left in the dust.
Just think about that phrase for a second. Cogs in a machine. That is literally how people started to feel. One day you're an independent farmer, the next you're just another anonymous face working in these dirty, really dangerous factories. The cities were exploding with crime, and it seriously felt like society was starting to come apart at the seams.
And then, right in the middle of all this chaos, a spark. But here's the thing, it wasn't political, it was religious. A huge revival, what we now call the Second Great Awakening, started to sweep across the country like a wildfire, and it offered people something they desperately needed: hope and a real sense of purpose.
Now, when I say revival, don't picture a quiet Sunday service. No way. We're talking about these massive, days-long, sometimes weeks-long outdoor events called camp meetings. Thousands of people would travel for days, literally camping out in tents, just to listen to these incredibly passionate, fiery preachers talk about hope and the power that every single person had to change their life.
This quote from one of the most famous preachers of the time, Charles Finney, really gets to the core of the whole thing. He's saying, look, if you want to change the world, you have to start with yourself. If individuals can be awakened and reformed, then fixing society will just follow. What a powerful call to action, right?
And that brings us to the really revolutionary idea at the heart of this whole movement: free will. Think about it. For the first time, people were being told on a massive scale that their destiny was not predetermined, that they had the power to choose to be better, to improve their own lives, and to achieve salvation. This was so much more than a religious idea. It was incredibly, life-changingly empowering.
Look at this shift. It's a complete 180. The old school thinking was that your fate was totally sealed from the moment you were born. It's all predestined. But this new idea, it was telling people, nope, you are in the driver's seat of your own life. Can you imagine how that felt? This one change in belief gave millions of people a brand new sense of control.
Okay, and here is the absolute key: the connection that turns belief into action. Let's call it the equality link. The logic is actually really simple and powerful. If every single person is equal in God's eyes, well, then doesn't that mean we have a moral duty to make sure everyone gets a fair shot here on Earth, too?
So what happens when you empower an entire generation like that? Well, that energy, it's not going to stay inside the church walls. No, it spills out into the streets, into society, and it creates this virtual army of activists, all fired up and ready to take on the country's biggest problems.
And the first and maybe most famous battleground for this new army: the fight for freedom, the fight to end slavery. Now, the abolitionist movement had been around for a while, but the Second Great Awakening basically poured gasoline on the fire.
Suddenly, religious leaders weren't just talking about slavery as a political problem. They started calling it a national sin. The question became impossible to ignore. How can you possibly believe that all souls are equal before God and at the same time hold another human being in chains? That moral argument was just so powerful, and the movement exploded. But the energy for reform didn't stop with abolition. Not at all. Another group of these new activists turned their sights on a different kind of freedom, the kind that comes from knowledge and education. This guy, Horace Mann, was a huge leader in the fight for public schools. His logic was pretty straightforward. For a democracy to actually work, the people have to be educated. He pushed for what he called common schools, schools that would be open to everybody, rich or poor, believing it was the great equalizer, the best shot at giving a poor kid the same chance as a wealthy one. And then there were reformers who turned their attention to the people society had basically thrown away, the people in prisons and the mentally ill, who were being treated with a level of cruelty that is just, it's hard to even imagine today.
This woman, Dorothea Dix, was an absolute force of nature. She wasn't just talking about the problem. She went into the asylums and prisons herself and wrote down every horror she saw. People chained to walls, locked in cages, living in absolute filth. And her testimony, summed up in that simple, powerful cry, "I tell what I have seen," it shocked the nation. It forced governments to actually do something, leading to the first modern mental hospitals and a whole new way of thinking about rehabilitation instead of just punishment.
So you can see the chain reaction playing out, right? It all starts with that societal stress from industrialization. That chaos creates a huge spiritual hunger, which gets filled by this religious awakening, and that powerful idea of free will. That feeling of empowerment then explodes into activism, with people organizing to fix things. And all of that, it forges a brand new identity for America.
Yeah, because this was way bigger than just a few separate movements. This was a fundamental shift in how Americans saw themselves and what they believed their role in the world was.
Take the temperance movement, for example. In those chaotic new cities, reformers looked around and saw alcohol abuse as a major cause of poverty, of violence at home, of accidents on the job. So they started framing sobriety as more than just a personal choice. It was a moral duty to protect your family and help build a better, safer society for everyone.
And here's something that is absolutely crucial to understand. Women were on the front lines of almost all of these reforms. But while they were out there fighting to free slaves and educate children, they ran headfirst into this bitter irony. They had zero political voice of their own. For leaders like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the next step was obvious. It was inescapable, really. If they wanted to truly reform America, they had to have the right to vote.
And you know, the legacy of this spark is, well, it's everywhere. The public school system we have today, modern hospitals and mental health care, prison reform, the right for women to vote. All of these things trace their roots back to this era. But maybe the biggest legacy of all is that lasting American tradition of activism, that core belief that just ordinary people have the power and the responsibility to fix what's broken in the world.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thought, doesn't it? The incredible pressures of the 19th century created this powerful spark for change that completely reshaped the nation. So when we look at all the challenges we're facing today, it really makes you wonder, what's going to be our spark?